She covered her aunt's shift as a cleaner. Never knew the millionaire guest would change her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The scent of fresh soap and lemon polish filled the quiet hallway of the Grand Meridian Hotel. The floor gleamed under the golden morning light that streamed through tall windows. A young woman in a simple gray uniform pushed a cleaning cart that squeaked softly with every step. Her name was Lena Monroe, 23 years old, a design student who had never imagined herself here. Today was not supposed to be her shift. Her aunt, Mrs. Delaney, had caught the flu, and the supervisor had warned that missing a VIP floor duty meant losing the job entirely. So Lena stepped in, her heart pounding harder with each floor number she passed. 17. That was where the richest guests stayed, the kind of people she only saw in magazines. As she reached room 1701, she checked the clipboard twice. The note said, "Vacant for housekeeping." She whispered to herself, "All right, Lena, you can do this. Just clean and leave before anyone notices." She swiped the keycard and stepped inside. The room was enormous, bathed in soft light from the floor to ceiling windows. A grand piano stood in the corner, and a faint melody still lingered in the air as if the walls remembered it. On the marble counter were silver cufflinks, a watch, and a folded newspaper, everything perfectly placed. Lena tied her hair back, slipped on her gloves, and began wiping the glass panels, humming under her breath. Her voice was light, untrained, but sincere. She cleaned carefully, making sure every surface shone. Then came the sound, a door opening behind her. She froze. A tall man stepped out of the bathroom, steam curling around his shoulders. A towel was wrapped around his waist, his dark hair still wet. His eyes met hers, sharp, startled, and commanding. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was low, steady, but firm. Lena's breath caught. I thought the room was vacant. I am so sorry, sir." She dropped the cloth, her hands trembling. He reached for his robe without breaking eye contact. "Clearly, it is not." "Who told you to come in?" Her words stumbled over each other. "My aunt was sick. I was just covering her shift. I did not mean to." He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Just go. Tell your supervisor I will handle it." Lena nodded quickly, picking up her cleaning cloth. But as she turned to leave, the towel she held slipped, revealing the small embroidered corner, a hand-stitched blue flower. The man noticed. "Did you make that?" She hesitated, her cheeks flushed. "Yes, for my aunt. She likes pretty things." He said nothing, only watched her go. Outside the suite, Lena pressed her back to the wall, her heart racing. She had just embarrassed herself in front of a guest who probably owned half the city. She whispered to herself, "Nice going, Lena. One wrong room, and your life is over." Little did she know that small embroidered flower would soon become the first thread connecting two very different worlds. The next morning, the sun rose over the skyline of downtown Chicago, painting the glass walls of the Grand Meridian Hotel in shades of soft gold. Inside, the lobby came alive with quiet elegance, heels clicking on marble floors, the scent of roasted coffee drifting from the cafe, the low murmur of voices greeting a new day. Lena Monroe arrived early, clutching her ID badge so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Her aunt, Mrs. Delaney, was still at home recovering from the flu. Lena had promised to return the uniform and apologize to the supervisor for the misunderstanding with the guest in room 1701. She had hardly slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man's face, the sharp jawline, the gray eyes, the steady way he looked at her when he asked, "What are you doing in here?" She walked past the service counter, keeping her head down. The housekeeping supervisor, Mrs. Hale, spotted her immediately. "You again?" Her voice cut through the morning hum. "You had one job, and you managed to walk into a guest's room while he was inside the shower." Lena swallowed hard. "I am sorry, ma'am. It was my mistake. The clipboard said the room was vacant." Mrs. Hale crossed her arms. "Vacant or not, you never step into a suite without a double confirmation." Do you realize who that guest is? Lena shook her head slowly. Mrs. Hale leaned closer, lowering her voice. Grant Carter, CEO of the Carter Design Group, a millionaire, and one of the most powerful men in the city. You are lucky he did not call the front desk to report you. The name hit Lena like cold water. She had read about him in business journals, an architectural genius who rebuilt half of Chicago's riverfront after the flood, a man admired and feared in equal measure. And she had walked into his private suite holding a mop. Mrs. Hale continued. You are not officially on staff, but since your aunt is a longtime employee, I will not file a report. Go home, Miss Monroe, and let this go. Lena nodded, her face burning. She turned to leave, but as she passed the lobby window, she caught sight of him. Grant Carter stood near the concierge desk, tall and composed, dressed in a navy suit that seemed made for him alone. He spoke briefly with the manager, his tone calm, his expression unreadable. When his gaze lifted, their eyes met through the reflection of the glass. For 1 second, Lena forgot to breathe. Then she lowered her head and hurried toward the exit. Outside, the winter air stung her cheeks. She walked fast, wanting to disappear into the crowd, but the memory of that moment clung to her. He had not looked angry. He had looked curious. By noon, Lena sat in the small apartment she shared with her aunt. The living room smelled faintly of eucalyptus tea and disinfectant. Mrs. Delaney rested on the couch, pale but smiling weakly. You covered my shift yesterday, did you not? Lena hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but I made a mess of it. I walked into the wrong room. The man inside was... She stopped, unsure if she should say his name. Her aunt finished softly. A guest who did not expect company? Lena managed a tiny laugh. Exactly. Her aunt reached for her hand. You have a kind heart, Lena, but hotels like that are full of people who see kindness as weakness. Do not blame yourself for their arrogance. Lena squeezed her aunt's fingers gently. I do not think he was arrogant, just distant, like someone who forgot what warmth feels like. Oh, that night, as the city lights flickered outside their window, Lena sat by her sketchbook. She drew the grand piano she had seen in room 1701, the way the light touched its surface, the way the curtains framed it like a stage. At the edge of the page, she added a small blue flower, identical to the one she had embroidered on the cleaning cloth. She closed the book, whispering to herself, that is enough of that dream. The next morning, her aunt felt worse, coughing and dizzy. Lena, can you drop my sick note at the hotel? Mrs. Hale needs it by noon. Lena agreed, though her heart sank at the thought of walking through those polished halls again. When she arrived, the staff entrance was crowded with carts and linen bags. She slipped quietly past the others, heading toward the supervisor's office. But in the hallway outside the elevators, a familiar voice stopped her. You again. Lena froze. Grant Carter stood a few feet away, holding a briefcase. His suit jacket hung over one arm, and his eyes, cool gray under the morning light, studied her calmly. She stammered, I was just dropping off a note for my aunt. I did not mean to disturb, he interrupted gently. You are Mrs. Delaney's niece? Yes, sir. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a thought. Your aunt is one of the best staff members this hotel has. She once told me that some people clean rooms, and others restore peace. She must have taught you that. Lena blinked in surprise. You spoke with her before. He smiled faintly. A few times. She once scolded me for leaving a coffee stain on the desk. No one ever dared to do that. For the first time, Lena saw warmth behind his calm exterior. He was not the untouchable CEO from newspaper headlines. He was a man capable of humility, even humor. He gestured toward the folded paper in her hand. May I? She handed him the note. He read it quickly, then folded it again. Tell your aunt to rest. The hotel can manage without her for a few days. Thank you, sir. As she turned to go, he spoke again, his tone lighter. And Miss Monroe, try not to walk into any occupied rooms next time. Lena felt her face flush as she nodded. I will remember that. When she reached the elevator, she heard him say quietly, almost to himself, she is honest. That is rare. The doors closed between them, and the reflection of her faint smile lingered on the mirrored wall. Outside, snow had begun to fall, thin and slow, softening the hard edges of the city. Lena looked up at the white sky and breathed out a small laugh. Maybe mistakes were not always endings. Sometimes, they were the start of something she could not yet name. And far above, in room 1701, the man who once dismissed her as an intruder stood by the window, holding a hand-stitched cleaning cloth with a blue flower on the corner. He did not know why he had kept it, only that it felt like a piece of something human in a life built entirely on glass and silence. The next morning arrived with a steady rain tapping against the tall windows of the Grand Meridian Hotel. The sky was a dull gray, and the streets below gleamed with puddles that mirrored the city's restless energy. Inside, the hotel was calm and perfectly ordered, but one person was anything but calm. Lena Monroe stood near the service elevator, clutching a small envelope in her hand. It contained a handwritten apology note and a replacement cleaning cloth embroidered with the same blue flower. She had made it the night before, unable to sleep, replaying every awkward moment in her mind. Her aunt had told her to forget it, but Lena could not. She wanted to return what she felt she had taken a fragment of peace from a man who seemed to have none. She took a deep breath as the elevator doors opened and stepped into the quiet corridor of the 17th floor. The carpet muffled her footsteps, and the air smelled faintly of citrus and cedar. She stopped in front of room 1701, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it echo. Lena slid the envelope under the door and whispered, "For what it is worth, I am sorry." She turned to leave but froze when the door opened behind her. "Miss Monroe," said a calm, unmistakable voice. Grant Carter stood in the doorway, dressed casually in a gray sweater and dark slacks. He looked different without his usual armor of a suit, more human, less untouchable. His expression was unreadable, but there was no trace of anger. Lena's voice faltered. "I did not mean to bother you, sir. I just wanted to—" He lifted the envelope slightly, a corner of the embroidered cloth visible inside. "Apologize?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, I know you said not to worry, but I wanted to make things right." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a tone softer than before, he asked, "Would you like to step inside for a minute? I think we both deserve a calmer conversation than the last one." Lena hesitated, glancing at the spotless hallway, the security camera in the corner, the polished brass numbers on the door. Her instincts told her to run, but something in his calmness made her believe it would be all right. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The room was the same as she remembered, elegant, spacious, with the faint smell of pine from the fresh flowers on the table. A low melody played from the piano in the corner, its soft notes lingering in the air like a memory. "I see you still clean up after yourself," she said before she could stop the words from leaving her mouth. To her surprise, he laughed. It was a quiet sound, almost uncertain, but genuine. "Old habits die hard," he replied. "Coffee stains are still my worst enemy." Her lips curved into a shy smile. "My aunt would be proud." He gestured toward the couch. "Please, sit." Lena perched on the edge of the seat, hands folded neatly on her lap. Grant set the envelope down on the table and poured 2 cups of coffee from a silver pot. "I am not used to guests who bring me embroidered cloths," he said, passing her one. "It is just a habit," she replied. "I sew when I am nervous. It helps me think." He studied her face for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You are not like most people I meet here. They rush, they perform, they want something. You just seem steady." Her cheeks warmed. "I would not say steady, sir. I just try to be kind. My aunt says a clean room is a reflection of a clean heart." He nodded slowly, repeating the words under his breath. "A clean heart." A brief silence followed, not awkward but reflective. The rain outside softened, turning into a rhythmic whisper against the glass. Grant leaned back slightly. "Do you plan to work here after graduation?" Lena shook her head. "No, sir. I study design. Interior architecture, actually. I want to create spaces that make people feel safe, like they belong." Grant's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if something clicked in his mind. "That is a rare goal. Most designers I know care about prestige, not belonging." "Oh, great. I suppose that is why I am not one of them yet," she said with a small laugh. He smiled faintly. "Do you have any of your sketches?" She hesitated. "Just a few. They are not professional. May I see them?" Her instinct told her to decline, but his tone carried genuine curiosity, not judgment. Slowly, she reached into her small satchel and pulled out a worn sketchbook. She opened it to the page she had drawn the night before the grand piano, the window light, the calm space that felt like his room. He leaned forward, studying it carefully. You notice the angles of the light, the way the reflection divides the floor into warm and cold tones. Most professionals miss that. Lena blinked in surprise. You sound like you know design. His smile deepened slightly, almost teasing. Perhaps I have picked up a thing or two. Oh. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. A young hotel manager entered, startled to find Lena there. Mr. Carter, I am so sorry. I did not realize you had a guest. Grant waved it off. It is fine, Mr. Lewis. We are done here. The manager nodded quickly and left, but not before giving Lena a curious look. As the door closed, she stood, flustered. I should go. I do not want to cause trouble. Grant rose as well. You have not caused any. In fact, I owe you thanks. Oh, for what? She asked. He picked up the embroidered cloth again, running his fingers along the stitched flower. For reminding me that handmade things still exist. For reminding me that effort still matters. Lena could not find the words to reply. She simply nodded and turned toward the door. Miss Monroe, he said softly as she reached for the handle. She looked back. I hope your aunt feels better soon. Her smile was small but sincere. Thank you, sir. When the door closed behind her, Grant stood in silence for a long time. Then he sat at the piano and pressed a single key, listening to the soft echo fade through the room. He opened the sketchbook she had left on the table without realizing it, and studied the drawing again. Outside, the rain had stopped, but droplets still clung to the window. For the first time in a very long while, Grant Carter felt something stir quietly in the corners of his life, something fragile, something kind, something real. The following week, the Grand Meridian Hotel hummed with its usual rhythm of quiet luxury. Business guests came and went. Weddings were hosted in the glass ballroom, and the staff moved swiftly through polished corridors like a well-rehearsed orchestra. Yet beneath that seamless surface, something small and unspoken had begun to change. Lena Monroe returned to her routine of helping her aunt part-time, running errands, and studying in the evenings. She had not planned to see Grant Carter again. The short meeting in his suite had felt like an impossible dream, too kind, too surreal, too far from her world. But dreams have a strange way of echoing in reality. 3 days later, Mrs. Hale, the housekeeping supervisor, called her unexpectedly. Lena, we need an extra hand on the 17th floor again. Your aunt is still under medical leave. And you already know the floor's standards. Do you think you can manage another shift? Lena hesitated, her fingers tightening around the phone. The 17th floor? She repeated. Yes. Do not worry. Room 1701 is unoccupied today. Mr. Carter checked out this morning, Mrs. Hale said briskly. The tension in Lena's chest eased. Of course, I will come right away. An hour later, dressed neatly in her pressed uniform, Lena pushed the cleaning cart onto the elevator. The hum of the machinery filled the silence. When the doors opened, she stepped into the familiar hallway lined with golden sconces and dark oak panels. She began her tasks quietly, room by room, letting the rhythm of cleaning settle her mind. Each sound felt grounding, the spray of disinfectant, the sweep of the mop, the soft hum she made without realizing it. But as she approached the end of the corridor, a voice interrupted. Miss Monroe. She turned, startled. Grant Carter stood several feet away, not in a suit this time but in a dark coat, his hands in his pockets. Mr. Carter, she said, her eyes wide. Mrs. Hale said you checked out. He smiled faintly. I did. Then I decided to extend my stay for a few more days. I suppose the city feels a little quieter than usual. Lena blinked, unsure if he was serious. I hope everything has been comfortable, sir. It has, he said, though the coffee in the lobby is still terrible. She could not help it. She laughed softly, covering her mouth. I could tell the staff to brew it stronger. He tilted his head, studying her. You really would you not? I just like fixing things that can be fixed, she said simply. For a moment neither spoke. Then he nodded toward her cart. Carry on, Miss Monroe. I will not keep you. But as he walked past, she noticed something different in his expression, something distant, thoughtful, almost troubled. That afternoon, Lena found out why. In the staff break room, two employees whispered near the vending machine. "Did you hear?" one said. "Mr. Carter might sell the Meridian chain. Apparently, the board wants to shift his design company's assets." Lena froze mid-step. She should not have cared. His business had nothing to do with her. But a part of her, the part that had seen him smile softly over a coffee cup, felt an ache she could not explain. That evening, while leaving the hotel, she noticed him again through the tall glass wall of the piano lounge. He sat alone by the window, his tie loosened, his phone untouched on the table. The reflection of the city lights shimmered across his face. She hesitated by the door. She could walk away. She should. But instead, she walked inside quietly. Stopping near the corner of the room, he looked up at the sound of her footsteps. "Miss Monroe," he said, his tone surprised but not displeased. "Are you off duty?" "Yes, sir. I was just passing by," she answered. "It looked like you could use company." He gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Then sit, if you have a few minutes to spare." She sat carefully, her hands folded. The air between them was quiet, filled with the faint notes of a soft jazz tune. "Rough day?" she asked gently. He looked at her, his gray eyes tired but sincere. "You could say that. The higher you climb, the less you hear honest voices. Everyone agrees, but no one listens." She nodded slowly. "My aunt says something similar. She says even clean glass can hide dust if no one looks close enough." Grant leaned back, letting out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Your aunt is wiser than half the executives I know." "I think she just sees people clearly," Lena said. "Maybe because she spends her life cleaning after them." He smiled faintly. "And you? Do you see people clearly?" She hesitated. "I try. But sometimes, I think I see what I hope for instead of what is really there." His gaze lingered on her face for a moment too long. "Hope is not a weakness, Miss Monroe. It is the only thing that keeps most of us standing." "Oh." Their conversation paused as the pianist switched to a softer melody, an instrumental version of an old song about home. The sound wrapped the room like a warm blanket. After a moment, Grant said quietly, "When I was younger, I worked as a janitor in my father's construction office. Every night, I cleaned floors no one else wanted to see. My father said that if I could respect the smallest tasks, I would learn how to build bigger things. I suppose I forgot that somewhere along the way." "Oh," Lena looked at him, her voice soft. "Then maybe this is your reminder." His lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "Maybe it is." They sat there for a while longer, talking about ordinary things, her studies, his travels, the smell of rain, the noise of cities that never sleep. When she finally stood to leave, he said, "Miss Monroe, I might need your advice on something soon. You seem to have a talent for clarity." She smiled. "I will try my best, sir." As she left, the rain began again outside, tapping gently against the tall windows. Grant watched her go, then turned toward the piano. He touched a single key, letting the note linger in the quiet room. He did not yet understand why, but for the first time in years, the sound did not echo hollow. It carried warmth, real, imperfect, human warmth, like the faint scent of soap that always seemed to follow her. The following Monday brought the kind of cold that seeps quietly into every corner of the city. Wind rushed through the streets, carrying the scent of rain and steel. Inside the Grand Meridian Hotel, the warmth of gold lights and faint music masked the outside chill. But for Lena Monroe, the air still felt heavy with uncertainty. Her morning began as usual, helping her aunt prepare breakfast, catching the train, and slipping through the staff entrance before the first wave of guests arrived. Yet the moment she stepped into the service hallway, she sensed something was off. Conversations hushed when she passed, and glances followed her. It was not cruel, just curious, like people watching a story they did not understand. Near the laundry room, Mrs. Hale's assistant whispered, "That is her, the one who spoke with Mr. Carter in the lounge." Lena kept walking, pretending not to hear. She reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. But gossip travels faster than elevators in a hotel. By noon, Mrs. Hale called her into the office. "Lena, I have received questions about your interaction with one of our long-term guests." she said, her tone professional but sharp. "I want to remind you that staff are expected to maintain formal boundaries." Lena stood straight. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Carter and I only spoke about coffee and design. Nothing inappropriate." Mrs. Hale sighed, her expression softening slightly. "I believe you, but be careful. People love to invent stories when they see something they cannot explain." Lena nodded. "Understood." When she returned to her duties, she tried to focus on work, polishing the brass handles, arranging the flowers, checking the minibar. But her thoughts kept circling back to Grant Carter. He had said he might need her advice, and that single sentence had stayed with her for days. What could a man like him possibly need from her? By late afternoon, as the winter light dimmed, she found her answer. "Miss Monroe," a voice called behind her. She turned. Grant stood near the elevator, holding a slim folder. He looked tired but composed, the kind of exhaustion that no amount of money could hide. "Mr. Carter," she said, lowering her voice, "is everything all right?" He nodded toward a nearby corridor. "Do you have a few minutes? There is something I would like to show you." She hesitated only a moment before following him. He led her to an unfinished wing of the hotel, an area under renovation. The floor was covered in plastic sheets, the air smelling faintly of paint and sawdust. Through the windows, the city stretched endlessly below them. "This will be the new Meridian Sky Lounge," he said, "a space for art, music, and community gatherings." The architects sent 3 proposals. I rejected all of them. "Why?" she asked. "Because none of them felt human," he replied simply. "They were beautiful, but cold. Perfect, but empty." He handed her the folder. Inside were glossy renderings of glass and steel, all symmetry and sharp edges. Lena studied them quietly, then closed the folder. "What do you think?" he asked. She spoke carefully. "They are impressive, but they do not breathe. You need warmth. Something that invites people to stay, not just pass through." "Oh," he tilted his head. "What would you add?" She hesitated, then said, "Light. Not bright light, soft light that moves with the time of day. Maybe curved walls, natural textures. Spaces where sound can echo gently, not sharply." He listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "You talk like someone who has lived in small rooms and still found beauty there." Lena smiled faintly. "Small rooms teach you where comfort truly comes from." Grant nodded. "Then perhaps I need your eyes more than any architect's." She looked startled. "Sir, I am not qualified," he interrupted. "You are honest. That is a qualification money cannot buy." For a moment, silence filled the unfinished room. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, streaming across the dusty floor in streaks of gold. "Would you help me design it?" he asked finally. "Just your thoughts. No contracts, no titles." Lena hesitated. "If it helps you see what people need, then yes." He smiled, the kind that softened the sharpness in his features. "Then let us call it a collaboration." From that day forward, their paths crossed more often. She met him in the mornings to discuss colors and materials, to walk through rooms and imagine how light would fall. Sometimes he would sit quietly, listening to her describe the feeling of spaces she loved, the sound of rain on old rooftops, the smell of wood warmed by sunlight. Other times he would share pieces of his own past. How he built his first office from borrowed money, how he lost friends to ambition, how silence often felt heavier than noise. To Lena, he was no longer just a name from magazines. He was a man who carried the weight of success like armor, who built walls not of concrete but of fear. One evening, as they reviewed plans, Grant said quietly, "Do you ever wonder if the things we build end up owning us?" She looked at him, unsure how to answer. "I think they do, if we forget why we built them in the first place." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe this project will remind me." They stood by the wide window, the city lights flickering below. The reflection showed 2 people from different worlds, standing side by side yet connected by something invisible. When Lena left that night, she felt a quiet warmth in her chest, a strange mixture of pride and worry. She knew her world was small, and his was vast, but for the first time, they overlapped. And back in his suite, Grant Carter looked again at her sketchbook, still resting on his desk. On one page, next to the drawing of the piano and the window, She had written a single line. Light makes even silence feel alive. He traced the words with his fingertips, then closed the book gently. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slow, silent, and endless, like a promise waiting to be understood. The following week brought clearer skies, the kind that painted the Chicago skyline with soft light and long shadows. Inside the Grand Meridian Hotel, a quiet rhythm carried through each floor. The sound of rolling carts, polished shoes, and the faint music from the lobby blended into a familiar hum. Yet, for Lena Monroe, every day felt slightly different now. Her mornings began with her aunt's gentle smile, a mug of tea, and a whispered, "Be careful, Lena." People notice kindness more than they should. Her aunt meant well, but Lena knew the warning came from worry. The world her aunt knew, the world of service and silence, did not easily mix with the world of men like Grant Carter. Lena arrived at the hotel with her sketchbook tucked safely in her bag. Grant had asked to meet her at 10 that morning to review a new idea for the Sky Lounge project. She told herself it was just another discussion, another day of observation. But her pulse quickened each time she thought of it. When the elevator doors opened onto the 17th floor, she found Grant waiting near the construction area. He was on the phone, speaking in a low, measured tone, but his eyes softened the moment he saw her. He ended the call with a simple, "Yes, proceed," and slipped the phone into his coat pocket. "Good morning, Miss Monroe," he greeted. "Ready to challenge my architects again?" Lena smiled. "Only if they forget that buildings should make people feel something." He chuckled quietly. "Then we are already in agreement." They walked through the half-finished space together. The walls were still bare, the air thick with dust and possibility. Grant gestured toward a corner that faced the river. "I am thinking of placing the piano here. The glass wall will frame the skyline at night." Lena studied the light carefully. "If you move it 3 feet closer to the center, the sunlight will hit the keys in the morning. That way, people will see both the city and the reflection." Grant paused, considering her words. 3 feet, he repeated. "That is the difference between function and feeling, is it not?" She nodded. "Sometimes it is." They continued to walk, exchanging thoughts about color, balance, and texture. It surprised Lena how easily conversation flowed between them. He spoke with precision but listened with patience, as if each word she offered mattered. At one point, she crouched to adjust a sheet of blueprints that had curled at the edges. As she did, her pencil slipped from behind her ear and rolled across the floor. Grant reached it first, picking it up and handing it back to her. "Your weapon of choice," he said, smiling faintly. She laughed softly. "Only when I know what to draw." "Oh?" He looked at her for a moment before saying, "You always know what to draw. You just need someone to see it." The words lingered longer than either of them expected. A knock at the door broke the quiet. A young assistant entered, holding a tablet. "Mr. Carter, the investors have arrived early. They are waiting in the East Lounge." Grant gave a short nod. "Tell them I will join them shortly." When they were alone again, he turned to Lena. "Would you like to see what a boardroom full of impatient investors looks like?" She blinked. "Me?" He smiled. "Consider it an educational experience. You have earned that much." Lena hesitated, unsure if she belonged anywhere near that meeting, but curiosity won. They took the service elevator to the East Wing, where a group of sharply dressed men and women waited around a long table. The view behind them stretched over the frozen river, glittering under the pale Sunday. Grant introduced her simply. "This is Miss Monroe. She has been assisting with the design concept for the new Sky Lounge." The room quieted. One of the older men raised an eyebrow. "A student?" "That is rather unconventional, Mr. Carter," Grant replied calmly. "So is vision. She understands how people feel inside the spaces we build." Most of us have forgotten that. Lena stood quietly beside him, her hands folded. She felt every eye in the room, but also the calm certainty in his voice. The meeting continued for nearly an hour. They reviewed costs, materials, and projections. Lena said little, only answering when asked, but each time she spoke, Grant listened fully, nodding slightly, as if her perspective carried equal weight. When the investors finally left, Grant exhaled and loosened his tie. "They will never admit it, but they liked your suggestion about natural light." She smiled. "I am glad it helped." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "You handle pressure better than some executives I know." I have worked under Mrs. Hale for 2 years, she replied lightly. That is excellent training. He laughed, the sound genuine and brief. Then his tone shifted. Miss Monroe, may I ask you something personal? She hesitated. Yes, sir. He looked toward the window. Why did you study design instead of something safe or profitable? She thought for a moment. Because spaces can heal people, even when people cannot heal themselves. My father used to say that when you change the light in a room, you change how someone breathes in it. I believed him. Grant's expression softened. He was right. She smiled faintly. He passed away when I was 15. After that, my aunt raised me. She taught me to clean rooms with care because someone else's peace might depend on it. For a moment, Grant said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. You and your aunt see the world in a way I envy. Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his calm demeanor shifting slightly. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped aside, his tone measured but tense. Lena turned toward the window, pretending not to listen, but a few words reached her. The acquisition can wait. I said no final decision until I return. No. When he ended the call, she asked gently, Business trouble? He gave a small smile that did not reach his eyes. Nothing new, just reminders that every choice costs something. She nodded, sensing the weight behind his words. Then I hope this one building something that matters costs you less. His gaze met hers, steady and quiet. I think it might save me instead. That evening, as she left the hotel, Lena looked back through the glass doors. She saw him standing near the piano again, his reflection merging with the lights of the city outside. The sound of faint music followed her into the cold night, a melody both new and familiar, carrying a promise neither of them yet dared to name. By the end of that week, snow had covered the edges of the Chicago streets like pale dust. Inside the Grand Meridian Hotel, the world continued as usual: polished marble, hushed voices, and the constant hum of the heater. But for Lena Monroe, something new was beginning to stir beneath the surface of ordinary days. She had spent most of her free time sketching new layouts for the Sky Lounge, filling pages with lines of light and shadows. Sometimes, her aunt would watch her draw at the kitchen table and smile softly. You look different these days, her aunt said one evening. Happier, but also thoughtful. Lena shrugged, pretending to focus on her pencil. Maybe because someone is finally listening to my ideas. Her aunt nodded knowingly. Just make sure he is listening for the right reasons. The next morning, Lena arrived early at the hotel. The winter air bit at her cheeks, and she clutched her sketchbook tightly as she rode the elevator to the 17th floor. The doors opened to reveal the familiar half-finished lounge, sunlight filtering through plastic-covered windows. Grant Carter was already there, standing by the blueprint table with 2 cups of coffee. Good morning, Miss Monroe, he said. You are early. So are you, she replied. He handed her one of the cups. I remembered you prefer it with no sugar. She blinked in surprise. You remembered? He smiled faintly. You mentioned it once, 3 meetings ago. She accepted the cup with both hands. Thank you, sir. That is kind of you. Grant gestured toward the sketches pinned to the board. I looked through the lighting plans last night. The way you drew the corner, seating the curve, it changes the tone of the entire room. Lena set down her bag, flipping open her sketchbook. I thought that corner needed warmth. People gather where light bends softly. Straight lines look powerful, but curves make people breathe easier. Grant studied her quietly for a moment, then said, You see emotion where most people only see angles. She gave a small smile. Emotion is what brings people back. They spent the next few hours walking through the space, testing perspectives and moving chairs, their words echoing softly through the empty room. The work felt less like an assignment and more like rhythm. He would suggest a structure. She would adjust it with intuition, and somehow their visions met in the middle. Around noon, an assistant entered carrying folders. Mr. Carter, the press team wants to confirm your attendance at the Meridian Anniversary Gala next month, he said. Grant nodded without turning. Tell them yes, but keep it low profile. When the assistant left, Lena asked, A gala? An annual event, he explained. It is mostly investors and partners. I never stay long. Lena tilted her head, smiling. Why not? Do you not like celebrations? He looked toward the window, his tone soft. It is hard to celebrate when you are still searching for meaning. She watched him for a moment, then said quietly, Maybe meaning finds you when you stop searching. He turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. You sound like someone twice your age. I grew up fast, she said simply. For a moment, silence settled between them, not awkward, but gentle. Then, as if remembering something, Grant picked up a folder and handed it to her. These are the final layout drafts. I would like you to review them and make any notes you feel are necessary. Lena blinked. Me? Sir, I am just a student. He interrupted firmly. You are the only one who understood what this space should feel like. That makes you the most qualified person to revise it. Her throat tightened with quiet pride. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I will do my best. I know you will, he said. When their meeting ended, Lena left the lounge with the folder pressed against her chest, feeling something she had not felt in years' confidence. In her mind, she could still hear his voice. You are the only one who understood. That evening, Grant stood alone in the same room, the light fading through the tall windows. On the table lay the embroidered cloth she had given him, folded neatly beside her sketchbook. He reached out and brushed his hand over the blue flower, thinking about the quiet strength of the girl who had walked into his life by mistake. For a man who had spent years surrounded by perfection, it was strange how much comfort he found in something handmade, something imperfect, something real. Outside, the city lights flickered to life one by one, and in that quiet glow, Grant Carter realized that the project he had begun to build might not be the only thing changing him. The following week arrived quietly, wrapped in pale sunlight that spilled through the tall glass windows of the Grand Meridian Hotel. The city had begun to thaw, and with the melting snow came a rhythm of renewal. Workers moved steadily through the half-finished Sky Lounge, their movements echoing faintly against the open space. Amid the quiet hum of tools and footsteps, Lena Monroe stood by the blueprint table, reviewing sketches with her usual care. Grant Carter entered a few minutes later, his coat draped over his arm, his phone silenced for once. He paused near the doorway, watching her as she leaned over the table. Her focus was absolute, her pencil moving slowly across the page, adding gentle curves to the lines he had drawn the night before. He smiled faintly. You are correcting me again, Miss Monroe. She looked up, startled, but not embarrassed. Not correcting, sir, just softening. Buildings should welcome people, not intimidate them. Grant approached the table, placing his coat aside. Then you are teaching me something I forgot long ago. They reviewed the plans together, adjusting the placement of the piano, the lighting fixtures, and the furniture flow. Time moved differently in that space. It was not work in the usual sense, it was conversation through shapes and ideas. When their session ended, Grant closed the folder and said, The board has approved our new concept. The construction team will begin implementation next week. Lena's eyes widened. They approved it? He nodded. Completely. And they asked me to give credit where it is due. I mentioned your contribution. Her breath caught. You told them about me? Of course, he said simply. They should know who gave this project its soul. Lena hesitated, unsure what to say. Thank you, Mr. Carter. That means more than I can express. He smiled gently. Then, let your work speak for you. It already does. Before she could reply, Mrs. Hale appeared at the doorway, clearly surprised to see them together. Mr. Carter, my apologies. I did not realize Miss Monroe was still assisting you personally. Grant's tone remained calm. She has been essential to this project. Please make sure she receives access to the Sky Lounge schedule until it is complete. Mrs. Hale nodded quickly, though her eyes flicked toward Lena with visible curiosity. Of course, sir. After she left, Lena turned to Grant. She will think I have been overstepping. Let her think what she wants, he said. Truth does not need defense. Later that day, as workers packed up their tools, Grant invited Lena to walk with him through the finished lobby below. The chandeliers sparkled like captured starlight, and the scent of coffee drifted from the cafe. He stopped near the grand piano in the center of the lobby. Do you play? He asked. She shook her head. No, sir. I only listen. My father used to play. He said music teaches patience. Grant's expression softened. He was right. Music builds silence between notes. That is where meaning lives. She looked at him curiously. Do you play? Not often, he admitted. But sometimes, when I cannot sleep, I do. He sat down at the piano bench, his movements unhurried. "May I?" he asked, glancing up. Lena nodded. "Of course." The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant, filling the space with a quiet beauty that made the world outside disappear. Lena stood nearby, listening, her heartbeat matching the rhythm. When the final note faded, she whispered, "That was beautiful." Grant looked up, his gaze steady. "It was your idea, remember? You said light should move with sound." I wanted to see if that felt true. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lobby seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of something fragile blooming quietly in the air. Then Grant rose, breaking the silence. "There is an art exhibit tomorrow evening downtown. I think you might enjoy it. Would you join me?" Lena blinked. "With you?" He nodded. "Purely as colleagues. I believe the installation's theme, Designing for Emotion, will inspire your next sketches." She hesitated, torn between curiosity and caution. "I have never been to a gallery like that." Then it is time you do," he said. "Sometimes new perspectives start with simply walking into a different room." After a pause, she smiled. "All right, I will go." The next evening, they met at the small art hall near the river. The air outside was crisp, the city lights reflecting across the water like gold threads. Inside, the gallery was quiet, filled with soft music and minimalist art installations. Grant introduced her to a few artists, though she mostly listened, absorbing every detail, the colors, the lighting, the rhythm of the space. When they reached one corner, she stopped before a sculpture made entirely of mirrored glass fragments. The reflections danced like liquid light. She whispered, "It is beautiful, but also broken." Grant stood beside her. "Maybe that is the point. Beauty often comes from imperfection." She turned slightly toward him. "Do you believe that, Mr. Carter?" He met her gaze, his voice calm. "I am learning to." They walked out of the gallery an hour later, the cold air biting but refreshing. For a long moment, they stood near the railing overlooking the river. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly. "I feel like I am seeing the city differently." Grant nodded. "That was the idea." As they said goodbye, he handed her a small folded paper. "A sketch," he said. "For you." When she returned home that night, she unfolded it. It was a simple pencil drawing her standing in front of the Sky Lounge windows, light spilling over her sketchbook. At the bottom, he had written one line in careful handwriting. "Light belongs to those who see beyond walls." She stared at it for a long time, her chest tightening with emotion she could not name. Outside, the city slept under a thin veil of fog, and somewhere high above, a man who once lived in silence found himself quietly waiting for morning. Morning light poured gently through the windows of Lena Monroe's small apartment, turning the edges of her sketchbook into pale gold. She had barely slept after the art exhibit the night before. The drawing Grant Carter had given her lay open on the table, the one where he had captured her standing in front of the Sky Lounge windows, surrounded by light. The lines were simple, but the emotion behind them felt deeper than anything she could describe. Her aunt, Mrs. Delaney, noticed her quiet expression as she poured tea. "You are thinking about him again, are you not?" Lena's eyes widened slightly. "It is not like that, Aunt. He is just different. He listens." Her aunt smiled gently. "Be careful, Lena. Listening is how kind hearts get lost." Lena nodded but said nothing. She knew her aunt was right, yet she also knew that her connection with Grant was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was not romance or admiration, it was understanding. Somehow, he saw her not as a cleaner or a student, but as someone who mattered. At the Grand Meridian that day, construction on the Sky Lounge entered its final phase. The workers moved busily, setting tiles, sanding walls, and installing the lighting design Lena had helped refine. The sound of drills and footsteps echoed through the half-finished space, but beneath the noise, there was anticipation. Grant arrived mid-morning, wearing his usual calm composure. He greeted the team, exchanged quick notes with the engineers, then crossed the room toward Lena. "Good morning, Miss Monroe," he said. "You look thoughtful." She smiled slightly. "Just hoping the light falls right. The way it does in the sketch." He looked at the window, where the winter sun streamed across the half-polished floor. "It already does. You have an eye for balance." They spent the morning walking through the space, checking every corner. Grant asked questions, and Lena answered carefully, though she noticed his focus seemed divided. Several times he paused mid-conversation, his phone buzzing insistently in his pocket. He ignored it twice before finally excusing himself to take the call. His tone changed instantly. "I told them to wait. Do not make another move until I approve the figures." He paused, listening, then said quietly, "Yes, I know what the shareholders want, but I am not selling." When he returned, his expression was distant, the calm surface of his face barely hiding the storm beneath. Lena spoke gently. "Trouble with the hotel?" He gave a short laugh without humor. "Trouble with everything else. The board wants me to sell the Meridian chain. They think it is outdated. They want new, modern, soulless properties instead." "Soulless," she repeated softly. "That is the word you hate most." He looked at her, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. "You remember everything, do you not?" "I remember what matters," she said. For a long moment, neither spoke. The noise of construction faded into the background, replaced by something quieter, heavier. Then Grant said, "Miss Monroe, would you believe me if I told you this project is the first thing that has made me feel alive in years?" Lena's breath caught. "I would believe it, sir, because it is the first thing that made me believe I could change something." He studied her face, and for an instant, the guarded man she had met weeks ago seemed almost gone. "You already have," he said softly. The following day, Lena brought her aunt to the hotel. Mrs. Delaney had recovered enough to visit, and Lena wanted her to see the space before the grand opening. As they walked through the Sky Lounge, the older woman's eyes widened with wonder. "It is beautiful," she said. "You made this happen." Lena smiled shyly. "We made it happen." At that moment, Grant entered with a group of investors. His eyes caught Lena's across the room, and for a brief second, the crowd and the noise seemed to fade. He excused himself politely and walked over. "Mrs. Delaney," he greeted with warmth. "It is good to see you again." She smiled. "You remember me." "I remember everyone who keeps this place running," he said. Then he turned to Lena. "Your final lighting adjustments were perfect. The space feels alive now." Before she could thank him, one of the investors approached, his voice brisk. "Mr. Carter, the press wants to know if you are confirming the sale after this launch." Lena froze. "Sale?" she whispered. Grant's jaw tightened. "It is not confirmed," he said firmly. "This hotel still means something to me." The investor frowned. "Meaning does not pay shareholders." Grant's expression hardened. "Then perhaps they are investing in the wrong man." He turned away, his eyes briefly meeting Lena's. The message in his look was clear. He was not giving up. That evening, as the sun set, Lena stood alone in the nearly finished lounge. The light from the river below shimmered through the tall windows, spilling gold across the floor. She closed her eyes and imagined how it would look when everything was complete. The guests laughing softly, the music playing, the warmth filling every corner. Grant appeared behind her, his footsteps quiet. "You were right," he said. "Light really does make silence feel alive." She smiled faintly. "I'm glad you see it too." He looked out at the horizon. "Sometimes I wonder if people like us, people who build and fix, do it because we are afraid of being broken ourselves." Lena turned to face him. "Maybe. But that is not weakness, Mr. Carter. That is how healing begins." He nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are teaching me more than I ever expected to learn." For a while, they stood side by side, watching the city flicker to life beneath them. The project was almost complete, but both of them knew something deeper had just begun, something fragile, uncertain, but real. And far below, reflected in the glass walls of the Grand Meridian, their silhouettes merged into two lives connected by light, by kindness, and by the quiet courage of believing that mistakes can lead to miracles. A week later, the Grand Meridian Hotel buzzed with unusual energy. The Sky Lounge project was almost complete, and workers were putting finishing touches on the details, installing lights, polishing glass, and arranging furniture exactly as planned. Everyone could feel the excitement of the coming grand opening. But for Lena Monroe, excitement mixed with quiet fear. She sensed that something was about to change. The rumors had started 2 days earlier, whispers among staff that Grant Carter's board of directors had grown impatient. Some said they were meeting privately to finalize the sale of the Meridian chain to a rival company. Others said Grant himself was considering resigning from his position at Carter Design Group to protect what mattered to him most. Lena wanted to believe none of it was true. That afternoon, she was in the Sky Lounge, adjusting one of the curtain rods, when Mrs. Hale entered briskly. "Miss Monroe, I need your signature on this safety checklist." Her tone was clipped, but her eyes softened slightly as she looked around the space. "You did good work here." "Thank you, ma'am," Lena said quietly. Mrs. Hale hesitated before adding, "Mr. Carter is in a meeting downstairs. Big decisions being made today. Stay clear of the lobby until it is over." Lena nodded, but her heart tightened. She could not ignore the tension in the air, the quiet urgency, the sense that something fragile was on the line. She decided to take a break, stepping onto the balcony where the city stretched endlessly beneath her. The wind was sharp and cold, but the view was breathtaking. She thought of all the moments that had led to this one, the wrong room, the misunderstanding, the kindness that had followed. Somehow, those mistakes had shaped her path and his. Downstairs, in the executive conference room, the atmosphere was different. Grant Carter sat at the head of the long table, facing 6 board members in expensive suits. A digital screen displayed graphs, projections, and numbers that seemed to drain the color from the room. "Grant," said one of the older men, "this is the best offer we will get. The acquisition guarantees profit. You cannot let sentiment cloud judgment." Grant leaned back, his gaze steady. "You mean I should sell something that still has life left in it? Something that has meaning?" Another member sighed. "Meaning does not pay employees. Business is numbers, not nostalgia." Grant's jaw tightened. "And that is why most buildings feel dead the moment you walk in. I built the Meridian to remind people that design can hold warmth. I will not sell it to someone who only sees it as a number on a spreadsheet." The room fell silent. Finally, the chairman spoke. "Then the vote is simple. If you refuse, we may have no choice but to remove you as acting head of Carter Design Group." Grant's hands tightened around his pen, but his voice remained calm. "Then do what you must. I will build again, even if I start from nothing." When the meeting ended, he walked out, his reflection flickering across the glass walls of the corridor. The weight of his decision pressed heavy on his shoulders, yet beneath the exhaustion, there was clarity. For the first time in years, he had chosen integrity over power. Upstairs, Lena was cleaning the last table when she saw him enter the Sky Lounge. His face was composed, but she sensed the turmoil beneath. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "is everything all right?" He stopped a few feet away, his voice low. "The board voted. I am stepping down as CEO." Her breath caught. "You resigned?" "I refused to sell the hotel," he said simply. "They gave me 2 choices, profit or principle. I chose principle." Lena stood still, unable to find words. She wanted to tell him he had done the right thing. But the look in his eyes made her realize how much it had cost him. After a moment, she said quietly, "The world may not understand now, but someday they will. You built something people can feel. That matters more than numbers." He looked at her with a small, weary smile. "You sound like someone who still believes in light." "I do," she replied, "because I have seen what it can do." For a few seconds, silence filled the room, gentle, heavy, meaningful. Then he reached into his pocket and took out the embroidered cloth she had made months ago. It was neatly folded, the blue flower still bright despite the wear. "I kept this," he said. "It reminds me that value is not measured by cost." Lena's eyes softened. Then it did what it was meant to do. He placed it gently on the table beside her. "After the grand opening, I will be leaving the company. I wanted you to know before anyone else." "Leaving?" she repeated. "Yes, but not forever. I am starting something smaller, something new. A design studio focused on rebuilding community spaces, places that feel alive." Her heart ached at the thought of him going, but also swelled with pride. "That sounds like you, Mr. Carter." He smiled faintly. "It sounds like us, Miss Monroe. You inspired it." Before she could answer, Mrs. Hale entered with a clipboard. "Mr. Carter, the press has arrived for the tour." He nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Hale. I will join them shortly." When she left, Grant turned to Lena once more. "You will stay for the grand opening, I hope?" "Of course," she said. "I would not miss it for the world." That evening, long after the reporters had gone and the lights dimmed, Lena lingered in the sky lounge. The city below glittered like scattered stars. She imagined how it would look once the first guests arrived, filled with laughter, music, and the quiet pride of everyone who had worked to make it real. Behind her, Grant stood by the piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys. The faint sound drifted through the air like a memory. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. He looked up. "No. I regret the years I spent forgetting what mattered, not the choice I made today." Lena smiled, her voice almost a whisper. "Then maybe this is not an ending." "No," he said, his tone certain. "It is the beginning of something honest." Outside, the wind moved through the city, carrying the light's reflection across the hotel's glass walls. And inside, for the first time in a long while, both of them felt what true peace sounded like: quiet, steady, and earned. The morning after Grant Carter's resignation was announced, the Grand Meridian Hotel felt unusually quiet. The news had spread faster than anyone expected. Staff whispered in hallways, managers spoke in low tones, and the air carried a strange mix of confusion and admiration. To some, it was madness, a man walking away from millions. To others, it was courage. For Lena Monroe, it was something far deeper. She arrived early, as she always did, her footsteps echoing against the polished marble floors. The Sky Lounge stood nearly complete, bathed in gentle sunlight that made the glass shimmer like water. Every corner of that room carried memories: her pencil marks, his questions, their quiet conversations. Now, it also carried the weight of goodbye. Mrs. Hale met her near the elevators, holding a clipboard. "Miss Monroe," she said carefully, "I know you have heard the news. The board is appointing a new acting CEO next week. Until then, operations remain unchanged." Lena nodded, trying to steady her voice. "And Mr. Carter? He came in earlier to sign the transition papers." "Mrs." Hale replied. "He said he would stop by here once more before leaving." After Mrs. Hale left, Lena walked slowly across the Sky Lounge. Workers were cleaning up the last of the tools, their chatter fading as they packed their things. When they were gone, the room felt enormous and quiet. She stood by the window, looking out at the city below. Chicago stretched endlessly, full of people rushing towards something: money, success, purpose. But all Lena could think about was one man who had chosen to stop running. A faint sound broke her thoughts, the click of shoes approaching behind her. "Miss Monroe." She turned. Grant Carter stood near the doorway, dressed simply in a dark coat, a folded document in one hand. His expression was calm, though there was something unspoken in his eyes. "You came back," she said softly. "I had to," he replied. "There are things I could not leave undone." "Oh." He walked toward the piano in the corner and placed the document on top. "The Sky Lounge officially belongs to the hotel now. But I made one request to the board. They must include your name in the design credits." Lena blinked in disbelief. "My name? That is not necessary." "It is," he said firmly. "You gave this place its heart. People should know that." Her throat tightened. "Thank you, Mr. Carter, for everything." He smiled faintly. "I should be the one thanking you. You reminded me that kindness still builds stronger foundations than ambition ever could." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was filled with everything words could not hold. Finally, he said, "I will be leaving the city for a while. I am meeting with a small group of designers in Seattle. We are starting something new, a company focused on community restoration." Lena nodded slowly. "That sounds like you." He looked at her with quiet pride. "And what about you, Miss Monroe? What will you do next?" "I still have one semester left before graduation," she said. "But after that, I think I want to keep creating spaces that help people breathe again. Maybe one day, I will build something as beautiful as this." "You already have," he said. Silence stretched between them, gentle but full. The afternoon light reflected off the windows, casting golden lines across the floor. Grant stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Do you remember what you said the first day we spoke here? You said light should move with time. I think people should too. Thank you for helping me move again." Lena smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then promise me you will not stop." He nodded. "Only if you promise the same." "I promise," she whispered. He extended his hand. She hesitated for just a heartbeat before taking it. His grip was warm and certain, the kind of gesture that said farewell, without finality. When he left, the Sky Lounge was silent once more. Lena watched from the balcony as his car disappeared into the flow of traffic below. The city seemed to swallow him whole, yet she knew that somewhere, beyond the glass and the noise, their paths would meet again. As evening settled, she turned back toward the piano. The embroidered cloth he had once kept lay folded neatly on top of it. Beside it was a small note in his familiar handwriting. It read, "For the one who reminded me that clean hearts build lasting light." Lena held it close, smiling through her tears. Outside, the first stars appeared over the skyline, shimmering faintly through the winter haze. Inside the Sky Lounge, light lingered long after the sun had gone soft, human, and real. 3 weeks passed since Grant Carter left Chicago, but his absence lingered in the air of the Grand Meridian Hotel like the faint echo of a song that refused to fade. The Sky Lounge had officially opened, glowing every night with soft light and quiet laughter. Guests filled the space he had built, the one Lena Monroe had helped shape with her heart and her hands. Every evening, she stayed a little later after her classes, walking through the lounge to make sure everything was perfect. The curved lines of the furniture, the gentle movement of the lights, the balance of sound and silence, every piece of it still carried his presence. Sometimes, she would stand near the window, staring out at the city, and imagine him watching the same skyline from somewhere far away. Her aunt often teased her gently. "You work too much, Lena. That place is beautiful because of you. But you need to live outside it, too." Lena smiled softly. "I know, Aunt. I just want to make sure it stays the way it was meant to be." One quiet evening, as she was reviewing maintenance notes near the reception desk, Mrs. Hale approached her. "You have a visitor, Miss Monroe," she said. "A visitor?" Lena asked, surprised. Mrs. Hale nodded toward the elevator. "A courier dropped off a parcel for you. Said it came from Seattle." The word made Lena freeze for a heartbeat. She took the package carefully. It was neatly wrapped, with a return address she recognized: Carter Design Studio. Her heart began to race. She carried the box to a nearby table, opened it slowly, and found 2 items inside: a rolled blueprint and a handwritten letter sealed in a simple envelope. She unfolded the paper, recognizing his handwriting immediately. It read, "Miss Monroe, I hope this letter finds you well. The new studio has begun its first project, a restoration of a small community library near the coast. The space is humble, but the goal feels familiar: to bring light where people stopped looking for it. I thought of you immediately. Enclosed is a concept draft for our second project. I believe your eye and your heart can see what others might miss. If you would consider joining us, the door will always be open. Until then, remember that the world still needs the kind of light only you can create. Grant." Lena pressed the paper against her chest, her eyes stinging with quiet emotion. She unrolled the blueprint next. It showed a circular space with windows that opened toward the sea. At the center, drawn in faint pencil, was a single line of text: "Designed for renewal." She traced the words with her fingertips. Renewal, that was exactly what his decision had been. He had walked away not to escape, but to begin again. The next morning, she brought the letter to her aunt. Mrs. Delaney read it with a knowing smile. "So he is building again," she said, "and he wants you to help him." Lena hesitated. "It feels impossible. I am still finishing school. Seattle is far, and I do not know if I am ready." Her aunt placed a hand over hers. "Lena, readiness is not about timing. It is about truth. You already know what this means to you." That night, Lena sat by her window, the city lights flickering below. She thought about the first day she had met him, about how nervous and lost she had felt, and how one mistake had changed everything. She remembered his words. Sometimes people build because they are afraid of being broken. He had been right, but she had learned something more. Sometimes people build because they finally believe they can. The next week, she received an email from the Carter Design Studio's assistant confirming an open invitation to visit. After long thought, Lena wrote back, "Dear Mr. Carter, thank you for trusting me again. The Sky Lounge continues to live and breathe, and it reminds me of the lessons we built into its walls. I would be honored to visit Seattle during the spring break to see the library project in person. I hope you are still playing piano. The music here misses its composer. Lena Monroe. When she pressed send, her heart felt both heavy and light at once. Days passed quickly after that. The Sky Lounge became her anchor as she prepared for graduation. More guests came, photographers took pictures, and one magazine even featured the design as the most human architecture in downtown Chicago. Her professors congratulated her for her internship at the Grand Meridian, unaware of the story that lived quietly behind those walls. One afternoon, as she was walking through the lounge with a group of design students, she stopped by the piano. The embroidered cloth still rested on top, perfectly folded. She touched its corner gently, her reflection merging with the city skyline beyond the window. "Do you know who made this place?" one of the students asked curiously. Lena smiled. "Someone who believed that buildings can listen, and someone else who taught him how." That evening, when the last guest left and the lights dimmed, Lena sat alone by the piano. The air smelled faintly of cedar and citrus, the same scent she remembered from months ago. She opened her sketchbook, turned to a blank page, and began to draw a lighthouse. At the bottom of the sketch, she wrote a single line: "Light does not disappear, it only travels." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, just as it had on the day they first met. Somewhere far across the country, she imagined Grant Carter standing in his new studio, tracing the same winter sky and smiling, knowing that their story had not ended. It had simply found a new horizon. Spring arrived with quiet rain and soft wind that swept through the streets of Chicago. For Lena Monroe, the days had grown both lighter and heavier at the same time. Her graduation was approaching, and so was her trip to Seattle. The Sky Lounge continued to thrive, filled each evening with music and conversation. But in her heart, there was an unspoken anticipation, a feeling that something unfinished was waiting for her beyond the horizon. The night before her departure, Lena walked through the lounge one last time. The chandeliers glowed gently, casting warm reflections across the glass walls. Guests laughed softly near the piano, unaware of the story behind every design choice, the curves, the lighting, the sense of calm that wrapped the room. She ran her hand along the edge of a marble table and whispered to herself, "Goodbye. For now." Her aunt met her in the lobby, carrying a small travel bag. "Everything packed?" she asked. Lena nodded. "Yes, just nervous." Mrs. Delaney smiled gently. "Nervous means you care. That is how you know it matters." Oh. The next morning, the train ride from Chicago to Seattle stretched endlessly across plains and mountains. Lena watched the changing landscapes from her seat, the gray of cities giving way to open fields, then to forests that seemed to breathe. With every mile, her heart grew steadier. She carried with her a single sketchbook and a copy of Grant Carter's letter. When the train finally arrived, the air in Seattle felt different, cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of salt from the sea. She took a taxi to the address written in the letter: Carter Design Studio. The building stood modestly near the waterfront, far from the tall skyscrapers she was used to. Its large windows looked out toward the ocean, and sunlight shimmered against its white walls. Inside, the space felt alive. Workers moved with quiet focus, arranging plans, testing models, and adjusting beams of light across wooden tables. There were no suits or ties, only people who looked content doing what they loved. A woman at the front desk smiled. "You must be Miss Monroe. Mr. Carter is expecting you." Lena followed her through the open hallway until they reached a glass door marked Studio 1. Through the window, she saw him, Grant Carter, standing by a wide drafting table, reviewing a set of blueprints. His hair was slightly longer, his sleeves rolled up, and there was a calmness in his posture that she had never seen before. He looked up when she entered. A slow smile formed across his face. "You made it." Lena's voice was soft. "I said I would." He walked closer, studying her for a moment. "You look different," he said. "More certain. Maybe because I finally believe I belong here," she replied. Grant gestured toward the table. "Then you came at the right time. We just finished the main framework for the community library. I saved one section for you." She raised an eyebrow. "For me?" He nodded. "You designed the heart of the Meridian. I thought you might want to design the heart of this one too." Lena stepped closer, scanning the plans. The library design was simple but full of warmth, curved windows, quiet reading nooks, and a circular atrium that opened to the sky. Her eyes softened. "It feels alive," she said. "That is because you inspired it," he replied. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the ocean drifted faintly through the windows, mingling with the rustle of papers. Finally, Lena said quietly, "You were right. Light travels. It just needed a place to land." Grant smiled, and it found one. As the afternoon light stretched across the studio, they stood side by side, reviewing the design together, two lives that had started from a mistake and found direction through purpose. The ocean shimmered beyond the glass, endless and bright, carrying with it the quiet promise of beginnings reborn. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet rhythm in the new Carter Design Studio by the Seattle waterfront. Morning light poured through tall windows, washing over wooden desks and rolls of paper covered in lines and colors. The place hummed with soft energy, the sound of pencils, the shuffle of plans, and the steady ocean breeze that slipped in through slightly opened vents. For Lena Monroe, each day felt like a page being rewritten. She had found herself among people who worked not for status but for purpose. They built not skyscrapers or hotels but shelters, schools, and library spaces meant for connection and care. The first time she walked into the unfinished library site, she stood still for a long moment, breathing in the scent of sawdust and rain. It reminded her of the sky lounge of beginnings, of second chances, of the man who had believed in her long before she believed in herself. Grant Carter had changed too. The sharpness that once surrounded him had softened. He still carried the quiet authority of a leader, but his voice was calmer, his steps slower. Sometimes, Lena would glance across the studio and see him reviewing blueprints with the same focus he once gave to contracts and profit margins. But now there was something more: contentment. One afternoon, as the rain tapped lightly against the glass, Grant called out to her from the far side of the studio. "Miss Monroe, can you come here for a moment?" She walked over, wiping graphite from her fingertips. "Yes, Mr. Carter?" He pointed to a sketch pinned to the board. "This corner here, your design for the reading space. The way you position the windows, it almost feels like the light is moving inside." "That was the idea," Lena said. "Light that travels through the day but never leaves the room completely." He smiled faintly. "You always manage to turn architecture into poetry." She looked at the drawing, tracing one line with her pencil. "It is not poetry, Mr. Carter. It is hope." He studied her quietly. "Then I hope people feel it when they walk in." "They will," she said simply. Over the next few weeks, their collaboration deepened. They worked side by side, debating details, sketching late into the evening, sometimes in comfortable silence. When the team left for the night, they often stayed behind to review progress, the room lit only by a single desk lamp. One evening, as they finalized the plans for the atrium, a sudden storm rolled in from the coast. Wind rattled the windows, and thunder echoed across the bay. The lights flickered once before going out completely, leaving the studio in near darkness. Lena froze for a moment, then laughed softly. "So much for modern design," she said. Grant chuckled, searching through a drawer. "Fortunately, I believe in old-fashioned solutions." He pulled out a small flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the table between them. "That is not very bright," Lena teased. "It is enough," he replied. "Sometimes a little light is all you need." They continued to work by the faint glow of the flashlight, the storm rumbling outside. The space felt smaller, quieter, almost like the world beyond the walls had disappeared. After a while, Grant leaned back in his chair, watching her sketch in concentration. "You know," he said, "when I first met you, I thought you were just another mistake waiting to happen." She looked up, surprised. "Thank you, I think?" He smiled. "I mean that in the best way. That mistake changed everything I thought I knew." Lena's voice softened. "Sometimes mistakes lead us to where we are meant to be." He nodded slowly. "You were meant to be here." The storm outside began to ease, the thunder fading into distant murmurs. For a long moment, they said nothing. The silence between them was warm, steady, full of understanding. Finally, Lena spoke. "When the library is finished, what will you do next?" Grant looked toward the window where raindrops clung to the glass. "I have not thought that far ahead. For once, I am not planning years in advance. Maybe that is the point." "You are allowed to rest, Mr. Carter," she said gently. You have built enough to earn it. He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes. And you, Miss Monroe, what will you build after this? She hesitated, thinking. Maybe a space for children who have nowhere to go after school. A place with art, light, and music. My father used to say that creativity keeps loneliness away. Grant nodded. Then we will find a way to make that happen. We, she repeated, half teasing, half hopeful. He looked at her, his tone steady. Yes, I would like to help, if you will let me. She met his gaze, her heartbeat calm, but full. Then we have a plan. The storm cleared completely by the time they packed up for the night. When they stepped outside, the wet pavement reflected the city lights like liquid glass. Grant opened the door for her, and they walked together toward the quiet street. The air smelled of salt and rain, the same scent that had filled the Sky Lounge months ago. For both of them, the night carried the weight of memory, but this time, it did not feel heavy. It felt right. As they reached the end of the block, Grant said softly, Lena, thank you for staying, for believing, for reminding me that light can start anywhere. She looked at him, her voice barely above the wind. Thank you for proving that it can keep going. Oh, and as the last traces of the storm disappeared over the sea, they walked side by side, unaware that their unfinished story had just entered its most beautiful chapter, yet the part where hope no longer needed to hide behind mistakes, because it had finally found a home. The next morning, the world outside Carter Design Studio shimmered with new light. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean. Sunlight spilled across the waterfront, touching every rooftop and window pane with gold. Inside the studio, the air carried the faint scent of rain mixed with paper and ink, a combination that always reminded Lena Monroe of renewal. It was early, and the space was still quiet. She arrived before the others, her steps echoing softly across the wooden floor. On her desk lay a stack of blueprints from the night before, slightly curled at the edges. She ran her fingers across the paper, tracing the lines she and Grant had drawn together by flashlight. Every detail felt alive, like the memory of a heartbeat captured in ink. Moments later, she heard footsteps approaching. Early again, Grant said from the doorway, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. Do you ever rest, Miss Monroe? She smiled. Only when I have finished something worth resting for. He handed her one of the cups. Then I suppose today you deserve a long rest. She laughed softly. We will see about that. They stood near the window, looking out at the calm water. Fishing boats drifted lazily in the distance, and the city hummed back to life. For a moment, neither spoke. The peace between them was comfortable, the kind that did not require words. Grant finally broke the silence. The board in Chicago called again yesterday, he said. Lena turned toward him. What did they want? They offered to reinstate my position, he said. They want me to return as chairman now that the merger has stabilized. She studied his face carefully. And what did you tell them? I told them no, he said simply. The answer came without hesitation, yet it carried a weight that lingered in the air. Lena's expression softened. That must not have been easy. It was easier than I expected, he admitted. I realized that for years, I built structures that reached the sky but never touched the ground. Here, I finally feel like I am standing on solid earth. She smiled gently. Then maybe this is where you were always meant to be. He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, maybe so. The day unfolded with its usual rhythm meetings, revisions, laughter from the younger designers. But there was something different in the atmosphere, an invisible thread connecting everyone, holding the space together like gravity. Every person in that room believed in the work they were doing. In the afternoon, Grant called for a short break. Everyone, take 10 minutes, he said. Miss Monroe and I need to review the presentation for the city council. As the team dispersed, he motioned for her to follow him to the side office. The room was small, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a single table covered in papers. He spread out the plans and pointed to one section. This is your area, he said. The atrium. The committee will want you to present it yourself. Me? She asked, startled. Yes, he said with certainty. You designed it. You understand its purpose better than anyone else. Her voice wavered slightly. But what if I say the wrong thing? He shook his head. You will not. Speak the way you design with honesty. Lena exhaled slowly, nodding. All right. I will do it. The following day arrived faster than expected. The presentation was held at the Seattle Civic Center, a large building overlooking the harbor. Rows of city officials and community leaders filled the room, their attention sharp, their questions ready. Lena stood at the front beside Grant, her sketchbook in hand. Her heart pounded, but when she saw him nod encouragingly from the side, she found her voice. She spoke about light, about the way architecture could shape emotion, about how the library's design was meant not just to house books, but to hold people's stories. She described the curved windows, the warmth of wood, the spaces where silence could comfort instead of isolate. By the time she finished, the room was quiet. One council member leaned forward and said, "That is the most human explanation of design I have ever heard." Grant smiled from his seat. When the presentation ended, the committee voted unanimously to approve full funding for the project. The room erupted in applause. Lena stood frozen for a moment, hardly believing what had just happened. Grant approached her and said softly, "You did it." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "We did it." He nodded, though his expression was thoughtful. "You realize what this means, do you not? You are no longer just a student. You are a designer now." The words struck her deeper than she expected. She smiled, her voice trembling slightly. "Then I suppose I owe you my first official thank you." He shook his head. "You owe me nothing, Miss Monroe. I should be thanking you. You helped me remember why I started building in the first place." Outside the Civic Center, the afternoon light reflected off the harbor, painting everything in gold. As they walked together toward the water, Lena said quietly, "You know, this feels familiar." He glanced at her. "Familiar? How?" She smiled. "Like the first day I met you. Except this time, I am not the one lost." Grant's expression softened. "No," he said. "This time, neither of us is." They stood at the edge of the pier, watching the sun sink slowly behind the horizon. The waves moved in gentle rhythm, the same way light had once moved across the Sky Lounge windows. For a long time, neither spoke. They did not need to. Everything that mattered was already understood: that some mistakes were meant to happen, that some meetings were not coincidences, and that sometimes the right people find each other again not by chance, but by choice. And as the tide rolled in quietly beneath them, the reflection of the fading sun stretched across the water, steady, golden, and unbroken, just like the bond they had built. A few days after the city council's approval, the studio felt brighter than ever. The team worked with renewed energy, their laughter blending with the sound of pencils scratching across paper and printers humming steadily. For Lena Monroe, the joy of that victory still lingered in her chest like a steady rhythm she could not quiet. Every morning, she arrived earlier than she needed to, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The work felt alive, and for the first time, she felt truly part of something greater than herself. The construction of the community library began soon after. The site, set near the edge of a quiet coastal town outside Seattle, overlooked a stretch of ocean framed by pine trees. It was peaceful, far from the noise of the city, yet it carried the pulse of purpose. Lena loved walking through the half-built structure, feeling the hum of tools, the chatter of workers, the promise of what the place would soon become. Grant Carter visited the site daily. He often stood at the edge of the foundation, studying the rising walls as though he could already see the finished design. He had changed again, in ways that only time could measure. The weight of corporate expectation no longer shadowed him. He looked lighter, freer, yet there was still that same steady determination in his eyes, the kind that had once built empires but now built hope. One afternoon, as the wind carried the scent of salt and wood through the site, Grant called out to Lena, who was sketching near the new atrium frame. "Miss Monroe," he said, smiling, "you have been here since sunrise. You are making the rest of us look lazy." She grinned, shading the page with her pencil. "I just do not want to miss anything. Every day it changes a little." "That is the beauty of creation," he said, walking closer. "It grows quietly, until one day it becomes something undeniable." Lena looked up from her sketch. "You sound like my father. He used to say that buildings have souls, but only if you build them with intention." Grant nodded. "Then your father was a wise man." For a moment, they both stood in silence, watching the light move across the open beams of the roof. Then Lena said softly, "You know, I never thought I would be here, not just in Seattle, but here, doing something that matters. You earned it, Grant replied simply. I may have opened the door, but you walked through it yourself. His words settled between them like sunlight, gentle, steady, honest. Later that week, the studio hosted a small gathering to celebrate the groundbreaking. The local community attended, along with city representatives, students, and volunteers. The event was simple, nothing like the grand corporate launches of Grant's past, yet it carried more meaning than any of them had expected. When it was time for speeches, Grant took the small stage first. His voice carried calm strength. Years ago, he began, I believed that success meant reaching higher. I measured progress by height, by numbers, by scale, but this project taught me something different, that sometimes the most powerful structures are not the ones that rise the tallest, but the ones that reach the deepest. This library will not just hold books. It will hold community. It will hold light. He paused, then turned toward Lena. And it would not exist without Miss Monroe's vision. She reminded me that design without empathy is just decoration. She gave this project its heartbeat. Applause filled the space. Lena's face turned warm, but she met his eyes and smiled gratefully. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped forward, her hands slightly trembling but her voice clear. I grew up cleaning rooms that other people built, she said. I used to think that beauty belonged to those who could afford it. But this project showed me that beauty can belong to anyone who builds with care. This library is not just a building. It is a promise that kindness can shape the world as much as ambition can. The audience fell silent for a moment before clapping again, louder this time. After the event, as the crowd dispersed, Grant found Lena standing by the ocean, her shoes sinking slightly into the damp sand. The sky above them was painted in soft orange and pink hues, the same colors that had filled the Sky Lounge months ago in Chicago. He stopped beside her. You handled that beautifully. She smiled, watching the waves. I just spoke the truth. That is why people listen to you, he said quietly. They stood side by side for a while, watching the tide roll in and out. The world around them felt suspended between past and future, between what had been and what was still coming. Finally, Lena turned toward him. When the library opens, what happens next? Grant thought for a moment, his expression calm. There will always be another project, another place that needs rebuilding. But for the first time, I am not chasing what is next. I am just here. She nodded, her voice gentle. Then maybe we both learned how to stay still. He looked at her with quiet pride. Yes. And perhaps that is what real success looks like. The wind lifted lightly between them, carrying the sound of the sea. The foundation behind them stood strong and new, waiting for walls, for light, for stories. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lena looked out at the water one last time. You know, she said softly, mistakes brought us here. Oh, Grant smiled. The best ones always do. And together, they walked back toward the unfinished building. Side by side, their shadows stretching long across the sand. Two builders, two hearts, and one story still unfolding under the open sky. The first walls of the new library rose steadily under the late summer Sunday weeks past, and each beam, each pane of glass, and each curve of wood began to mirror the vision that once only lived on paper. The community around the site had started to notice. Children often gathered at the fence to watch, their laughter echoing across the open field, while older residents stopped by with coffee and gratitude for the workers. Lena Monroe had become the heart of the construction site. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, sketchbook in hand, walking the perimeter to study how light moved across the growing structure. She checked the angles, the shadows, and the reflections on the glass. She greeted the crew by name, helped measure panels, and even swept debris when needed. To everyone, she was not just the young designer who worked with Grant Carter, she was part of the community now. Grant often arrived later in the morning, usually carrying 2 cups of coffee. One was always for her. Fuel for genius, he would say, handing it to her with a quiet smile. Lena always replied, fuel for teamwork. The easy rhythm between them had become part of the day, an unspoken partnership that balanced kindness and precision. He handled logistics, meetings, and permits. She handled design, details, and the human side. One evening, after the crew had gone home, the two of them stayed behind to check progress. The library's main atrium now stood complete, open to the sky with a circular roof that allowed light to filter through in long golden ribbons. Dust hung in the air like quiet stars. Lena stood in the center, looking upward. "It feels alive already," she said softly. Grant stepped beside her, hands in his pockets. "It does. You were right about the curved skylight. It changes everything." She smiled faintly. "I wanted the sunlight to move through the day, like time painting the room." He nodded. "And at night?" "At night," she said, "the moonlight will do the same." Grant looked around the space, his expression thoughtful. "Do you realize what this is, Miss Monroe? This is the first project in years that feels complete even before it is finished." She glanced at him. "Because it was built with something real." He met her eyes. "Because it was built with heart." Silence followed, but it was not empty, it was full of shared meaning, the kind that needed no further explanation. Days turned into weeks. The construction neared completion. One morning, a newspaper journalist visited the site to interview Grant about the library. The headline the next day read, "Former CEO builds hope instead of hotels." The article praised his shift from profit-driven projects to community-centered design, but it also mentioned something that made Lena's heart stop for a moment. It said, Carter's new philosophy was inspired by a young designer who reminded him what purpose feels like. She read the sentence again and again, unsure how to feel. Pride swelled quietly, but so did humility. That afternoon, when she saw Grant, she tried to make light of it. "You made the paper," she said, handing him a copy. He smiled. "So did you." "I did not expect that," she admitted. He looked at her gently. "You should have. You earned it." Lena folded the paper carefully. "I never wanted attention. I just wanted to make something that mattered." "That is exactly why you deserve it," he replied. As the sun set that day, the workers cleaned up and left. Lena lingered behind again, watching the colors shift across the sky through the unfinished windows. Grant stood nearby, leaning against a column, watching her with quiet thoughtfulness. "You know," he said after a while, "when I walked away from the company, I was terrified. I thought I had lost everything. But standing here now, I realize I did not lose anything that mattered. I found what I had been missing." Lena turned toward him. "What was that?" "Meaning," he said simply, "and peace." She smiled softly. "Then maybe mistakes are not really mistakes after all. Maybe they are invitations to begin again." He nodded slowly. "You have a way of turning life into lessons." "Only because I learned from good teachers," she replied, her eyes glancing toward him. He chuckled quietly. "You mean stubborn ones?" "Maybe," she said with a grin. "But the best lessons are the ones that stay." Oh, night began to fall, filling the space with a cool glow from the skylight above. The sound of the ocean drifted faintly from beyond the trees. Grant looked around the room one last time before saying, "In a few weeks, this place will open. People will come here to read, to rest, to start over. I want you to give the opening speech." "Me?" she asked, startled. "Yes. It should come from the one who gave this place its soul." Her throat tightened. "I do not know what to say." He smiled. "Say what you always do, speak from the heart. That is enough." For a moment, she looked at him, realizing how much had changed between them, not just the project, but themselves. The woman who once swept hotel floors now designed buildings that shaped lives, and the man who once led an empire now found peace in simplicity. As they left the site, the stars began to appear over the sea, their reflection shimmering across the half-finished windows. Lena turned back once, watching the structure glow under the moonlight, and whispered, "It is beautiful." Grant heard her and said quietly, "It is only the beginning." Together, they walked toward the car in silence, their steps slow, steady, and in sync. Neither knew exactly what would come next, but both understood something deeper than words. The journey that began with a mistake had turned into a story of purpose, of redemption, and of light that refused to fade. The morning of the library's grand opening arrived with calm skies and gentle light over the coastal town. The air smelled of sea salt and new beginnings. Ribbons of sunlight slipped through the tall glass panels of the finished building, casting soft reflections across the wooden floors. For months, the people had watched this place grow from blueprints into something real. Now, they gathered outside, their voices full of excitement, waiting for the doors to open. Inside, Lena Monroe stood near the atrium, her hands clasped tightly around her sketchbook. Her heart was steady, yet every beat carried memory. Each mistake, each choice, each late-night sketch that led to this moment. Around her, staff moved briskly, setting flowers, adjusting signs, and making sure everything was perfect. But to Lena, it already was. Grant Carter approached quietly, dressed in a simple gray suit, his calm presence cutting through the noise. "You are early," he said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "So are you," she replied. "I could not stay away," he said. "Today belongs to you." She shook her head lightly. "No, it belongs to all of us." He looked around the space, the sunlight, the glass, the gentle curve of the ceiling, and exhaled softly. "Do you remember what I said when we started this project?" "That we were building a promise," she answered. He nodded. "And today, we keep it." Guests began to enter the main hall, their footsteps echoing faintly against the new floors. Local children ran to the reading area, laughing as they touched the rows of freshly shelved books. Elderly residents sat quietly near the windows, watching the light shift across the room. The space felt alive, filled with the simple hum of life and gratitude. When it was time for speeches, the crowd gathered under the central skylight. The mayor spoke first, followed by the town's education director. Finally, Grant took the stage. He spoke with calm conviction. "This library is not just a building," he said. "It is proof that when people choose compassion over competition, they build something lasting. I once measured success in skyscrapers. Now I measure it in how many hearts a space can hold." The audience applauded warmly. Then, with a proud smile, he gestured toward Lena. "And now, the person who gave this library its soul, Miss Lena Monroe." For a moment, she froze. The sound of applause faded into a distant hum. Then she stepped forward, holding her sketchbook close. Her voice trembled slightly at first, but grew steadier with each word. "When we began this project, I was still learning what it meant to build. I thought architecture was about walls and windows. But I learned it is really about people. It is about creating places where they can breathe, think, and heal. This library belongs to all of you. It was made with your stories in mind." She paused, looking up through the glass roof at the light pouring in. "Someone once told me that light moves through time. I think kindness does too. Every act of care builds something that lasts longer than stone or glass. So, thank you for letting me build this with you." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Some stood, others wiped quiet tears. Grant watched from the side, his expression calm but proud. He knew that moment belonged entirely to her. After the ceremony, as guests filled the library, Lena stepped outside for air. The breeze carried laughter from the open doors behind her. She stood near the edge of the garden, the sea stretching wide before her. Grant joined her a moment later. "You spoke beautifully," he said. She smiled softly. "I only spoke the truth." He nodded. "Then promise me something." "What?" she asked. "Promise me that you will keep building no matter where life takes you." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the ocean light. "Only if you promise the same." He smiled. "That seems fair." For a while, they stood in silence, watching the waves roll toward the shore. Behind them, the library shimmered in the sunlight, its windows glowing with reflections of the people inside. It was no longer just a building. It was a living story, a story of mistakes turned into meaning, of light finding its way home. And for both of them, it marked not an ending, but the beginning of something new. A month passed after the library's opening, and the rhythm of life began to settle once more along the quiet Seattle coast. The mornings carried the soft hum of traffic mixed with ocean breeze, and every evening the library glowed like a lantern against the horizon. Families came to read together, children played in the courtyard after school, and volunteers filled the schedule with workshops and music nights. For Lena Monroe, the success of the project felt both surreal and deeply grounding. Each day she visited, she found new traces of life blooming within the walls they had built bookmarks left behind. Laughter echoing from the children's section, and the gentle rustle of pages turning. She had designed spaces before, but this one felt different. It felt alive. Grant Carter visited less often now. He had stepped back intentionally, allowing the local team to manage daily operations. But whenever he did appear, the staff greeted him warmly, and the community treated him not as a celebrity but as one of their own. Lena noticed that he seemed lighter with each visit, his smile easier, his gaze softer. The burden that once weighed on him, the relentless chase for perfection, had faded. One late afternoon, Lena sat near the reading balcony overlooking the sea, sketchbook open. The sunlight hit the pages, casting a glow over her rough pencil strokes. She was sketching children at the garden table, their faces full of concentration as they drew. Grant approached quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might need this," he said, setting one beside her. She looked up with a smile. "Thank you. You have learned my routine." "I am observant," he replied lightly. "Besides, it is hard to miss when you always sit in the same spot." "This spot has the best view," she said. "It reminds me of the Sky Lounge, the way the light bends at this hour." Grant nodded, following her gaze out toward the horizon. That project was the beginning of everything. Was it not? "It was," Lena said softly. "Even the mistakes. Especially the mistakes," he added. For a long moment, they sat quietly, watching as the sunlight reflected off the water. The world outside was calm, but within that silence lay the echo of everything they had endured. The loss, the discovery, the rebuilding. Finally, Grant said, "You know, I have been thinking of expanding the studio. Not for profit, but for purpose. Smaller branches, in places that need rebuilding: schools, shelters, clinics. Real spaces for real people." Lena turned toward him. "That sounds incredible. You should do it." He smiled faintly. "Only if you will help me again." "Mo." She blinked, taken aback. "Me?" "Yes," he said simply. "You understand people. You build with empathy. That is what these projects will need." Her voice softened. "You do not need my help, Mr. Carter." He looked at her steadily. "Maybe not, but I want it." The words hung in the air, gentle but full of meaning. Before she could respond, a group of children ran past them, their laughter breaking the quiet. One of the girls waved up from below. "Miss Lena, Mr. Grant, come see what we made." They followed the children to the courtyard, where a small art exhibit had been set up: drawings made by the kids who spent their afternoons at the library. Among them were colorful pictures of books, trees, and families. One picture stood out, a sketch of the library itself, glowing under a bright sun, with 2 figures standing beside it, one in a long coat, one holding a notebook. Grant leaned closer, smiling. "That looks familiar." Lena laughed softly. "Apparently, we made an impression. Though, they captured the light perfectly," he said. "They did," she agreed. The children proudly explained each drawing, their excitement contagious. Grant listened intently, kneeling down to their level, asking questions about their ideas. Lena watched him with quiet admiration. She realized that the man who once led boardrooms now listened to children's stories with the same seriousness he once reserved for investors. It was perhaps the most profound transformation she had ever seen. As the evening settled, the event ended, and families began to leave. The courtyard lights flickered on, bathing everything in a warm glow. Lena and Grant stayed behind, helping the volunteers tidy up. When the last chair was stacked, Grant said, "Do you ever stop to think about how far you have come?" Lena paused, looking around. "Sometimes, but I think about how far we still have to go more often." He smiled. "That sounds like something I would have said years ago." She glanced at him playfully. "Maybe you are rubbing off on me, or maybe you are reminding me who I used to be," he replied quietly. The sky turned a deeper shade of blue as the first stars began to appear. The library behind them glowed with life voices, light, warmth. Lena said softly, "You know, it feels strange. The more complete this place becomes, the less it feels like an ending." "That is because it is not," Grant said. "Endings are just another word for beginnings." She smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Then what do we call this?" He looked at her, his tone calm but certain. "We call it home." The wind carried the faint scent of salt and pine, and for a moment, everything stood still: the sea, the sky, and the quiet understanding between 2 people who had once met by accident but stayed by choice. As the night deepened, the reflection of the library shimmered across the water, like a promise, steady, luminous, and unbroken. And standing in that light, Lena Monroe knew that every step, every wrong turn, and every small act of courage had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Autumn came softly to the coast, carrying crisp air and golden light. The leaves near the library turned shades of amber and red, falling slowly over the cobblestone walkway that led to the entrance. The once new building had now settled into its rhythm, blending seamlessly with the life of the town. It was no longer just the library. It was the heart of the community. People met there, learned there, healed there. It had become what Lena Monroe and Grant Carter always hoped it would be, a space that breathed kindness. On a quiet afternoon, Lena arrived earlier than usual. She wanted to spend time alone before the evening celebration. The town had planned a one-year anniversary gathering to mark the success of the project. It was not grand, just music, food, and the people whose lives had been touched by the place. As she walked through the familiar halls, the soft murmur of voices and turning pages greeted her. She stopped by the reading atrium, where sunlight streamed through the curved skylight. Dust sparkled in the air like fragments of light. It was exactly as she had imagined on paper years ago. Her fingers brushed the railing as she whispered to herself, "It still feels alive." Behind her, a familiar voice replied, "That is because you built it that way." She turned. Grant stood by the doorway, a small smile on his face. He looked the same yet different, steady, calmer, as though the world had finally found its proper weight in his hands. "You were early," Lena said. "I wanted to see the library before the crowd arrived," he said. "And I wanted to see you." She smiled softly. "You could have said that second part first." He chuckled, stepping closer. Old habits die hard. They walked together through the corridors, stopping every few steps as he admired the details. "You know," he said, "this place has changed more lives than any skyscraper I ever built. The newspaper wrote about it last week. They called it a living monument to empathy." "That is a better title than profit margins," she teased. He nodded. "Much better." "Oh." They stopped by the children's reading corner, now full of tiny chairs, soft rugs, and walls painted with colors that mirrored the sea. A few children waved at them from behind stacks of books. One little boy ran up, holding a hand-drawn picture. "Miss Lena, look," he said proudly. "It is the library." Lena knelt to his level, smiling. "It is beautiful. You even drew the skylight." "That is where the light comes in," the boy said. "My mom says this place makes her happy." Lena's heart warmed. "It makes me happy too." When the boy ran off, Grant said quietly, "You see, that is your legacy." She shook her head gently. "It is ours." Evening came slowly, wrapping the coastline in a soft orange glow. The courtyard lights flickered on as the townspeople gathered for the celebration. Tables were lined with candles and warm food, and a small local band played near the steps. Grant and Lena stood together by the entrance, greeting everyone as they arrived. During the speeches, the mayor spoke again. This library was built not by corporations, not by blueprints alone, but by people who believed in the quiet power of light, he said. And it all began with two people who understood that kindness can be the foundation of anything worth building. When the crowd applauded, Lena felt her chest tighten. She glanced at Grant, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. Later that night, after the laughter had faded and most guests had gone home, the two of them stayed behind. The courtyard was quiet now, lit only by the soft glow of the windows. The ocean shimmered faintly in the distance. Grant spoke first. "I have been thinking about what comes next," he said. "There are other towns that need what we built here. I want to start new projects, not as expansions, but as seeds, places of learning, healing, and belonging." She looked at him with pride. "Then you will keep doing what you were meant to do." He smiled. "Not alone, I hope." She met his gaze. "You will not be." They walked toward the shore, the sand cool beneath their shoes. The sound of the tide filled the spaces between their words. Grant said softly, "Do you ever think about how strange it all was? How one mistake led to this?" "All the time," Lena replied. "If I had not covered my aunt's shift that day, I would never have met you. It still feels unreal." "One in my..." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes the wrong door opens to the right place." They stopped at the edge of the water, where moonlight shimmered across the waves. For a long time, neither spoke. The world seemed to pause with them, as if listening. Finally, Lena said, "This feels like a full circle. The Sky Lounge, the library, everything, it all started with light." Grant smiled gently. "And it ends with it, too." She looked out over the horizon. "No," she said softly. "Light never ends. It just travels." He glanced at her, his voice quiet but certain. "Then we will keep following it." They stood side by side, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. The wind carried the faint sound of music from the town behind them, mingling with the rhythmic crash of waves. The moon reflected off the library's windows behind them, casting a golden trail across the sand. It was not a grand ending, not a cinematic farewell, just two people, bound by purpose and choice, standing where light met the sea. And as the tide reached their feet, Lena Monroe smiled, the kind of smile that belonged not to endings, but to beginnings that never stopped.